Lust is rarely about the body in front of us. It's about the distance between what we want and what we're allowed to touch. The mind turns that distance into desire. What we can't have becomes charged with meaning, because our imagination starts to fill the gap with everything we wish could be true. When someone is out of reach, every glance becomes a language. Every silence feels heavy with potential. The tension isn't just sexual, it's psychological. It's the thrill of wanting something that confirms we're still alive enough to want. When the person we desire remains beyond us, it keeps the fantasy pure, untouched by the imperfections that reality always brings. Lust thrives in absence, because absence leaves room for projection. You don't know their flaws, so your mind builds them from your longing. You don't know how they'd love you, so your mind imagines it perfectly. You're not falling for them. You're falling for what your heart creates in their image. If this feels familiar, stay with me. We've all been there, scrolling through a message thread that never becomes more, rereading the pause between their words like it holds a secret. Our minds replay moments that never even happened, crafting an emotional film we swear is real. But what we're really chasing is intensity, and intensity often disguises itself as love. Lust becomes strongest when it feeds on restriction. When we sense we can't have something, it triggers the same systems that once protected us from deprivation. The human brain learned long ago that what's scarce must be valuable. So emotional scarcity feels like proof of worth. We interpret the difficulty as depth and the lack of access as significance. It's not that the person is extraordinary. It's that the chase awakens something ancient inside us. The hunger itself feels sacred. When you ache for what you can't touch, you feel your edges again. Desire reminds you that you still have boundaries, and that something still has the power to cross them. Sometimes we confuse that ache with connection, because when you're emotionally starved, even a little attention feels like a feast. You start to build castles on crumbs. You tell yourself it's love, but what it really is recognition. You're seeing in them what you wish someone had once seen in you. And so the mind amplifies every signal. The way their eyes linger becomes a story. The way they pull away becomes a test. You start reading between lines that may not even exist, because the fantasy isn't about them. It's about the version of you that finally feels wanted. People mistake lust for proof of compatibility, but often it's the opposite. The ones we can't have reflect the parts of us we haven't healed. Their unavailability mirrors our own, the places inside that learned to desire distance because closeness once hurt. So the unattainable person feels familiar. They activate the part of you that's still reaching for what never fully loved you back. When lust hits hardest, it's usually not new. It's memory disguised as passion. It's the echo of an old longing replaying itself in a new body. Something in you remembers what it felt like to chase approval, to fight for attention, to prove you were worth being chosen. And every time you want someone you can't have, that pattern repeats, like a song your nervous system never learned to stop humming. But we rarely notice this, because fantasy is safer than clarity. The mind prefers the illusion of connection to the risk of disappointment. As long as it stays imagined, it can stay ideal. Desire thrives in the absence of truth. That's why when they finally turn toward you, the spell can break. Not because the attraction is gone, but because reality takes away the mystery. And yet, part of you doesn't want the spell to break. Because longing gives life direction. It gives the heart something to orbit around. The fantasy becomes a form of emotional gravity, holding you in motion, keeping you from sinking into emptiness. You may not even want the person. You want the feeling they awaken, the feeling of aliveness, of possibility, of being near something that could finally make you whole. That's why lust fades when it's fulfilled. Once desire becomes possession, the tension that sustained it dissolves. The fantasy dies in the arms of reality. Because you can't project onto what's already known. And knowing is rarely as intoxicating as imagining. You begin to realize that the thing you longed for most was never them. It was the space they filled in your inner world. But that realization hurts, because it means the high was self-created. It means the longing was a mirror, not a promise. It means that what you thought was about love was really about self-recognition. And maybe that's what makes it so addictive. The ache feels personal, sacred, almost holy. It becomes a language between who you are and who you still hope to become. Every unfulfilled desire leaves a trace. It teaches you where your hunger lives. It shows you what kind of love your system still believes is out of reach. And if you look closely, every unattainable person you've ever craved has been guiding you back to the same question. What am I really trying to feel? Maybe it's safety. Maybe it's proof. Maybe it's redemption. But it's never just lust. It's a conversation between your unmet needs and your vivid imagination. And every time you find yourself yearning for someone you can't have, you're actually meeting the edge of your own emotional landscape, the one you've spent years avoiding, the one that still believes love must be earned through longing, the one that finds comfort in almosts, because almosts never have to end. You can stay suspended in the possibility forever, untouched, undamaged, untested. Desire becomes a place to hide from real intimacy, because real intimacy would demand you be seen without the glow of fantasy. That's the paradox. Lust gives you the illusion of closeness while keeping you safely apart. It lets you feel intensity without vulnerability. You can ache without risking rejection, dream without being disappointed, want without having to face what love truly costs. And maybe that's why it feels so powerful. It gives you control over what once felt uncontrollable. But something deeper happens when you realize this. When you start to see the pattern beneath your own wanting, you begin to recognize that every forbidden attraction is a doorway, not to the other person, but to the part of you that still fears being ordinary. Because maybe you only chase the impossible because you still believe you're not enough for the possible. And yet, what happens when you stop running that story? When you stop needing desire to prove your worth? When you finally let yourself be wanted without the chase, without the tension, without the fantasy? Something in you grows quiet, almost unfamiliar in its peace. But before that quiet comes, there's always one last pulse of hunger. The one that feels like it could consume you. The one that whispers that this one is different. The one that tests whether you've really learned to see the illusion for what it is. It's in that moment, between knowing and wanting, that we meet the real edge of ourselves. And it's there that the story turns inward again. When we crave what we can't have, we aren't weak. we're remembering something ancient. Desire has always been the body's way of saying, there is life left in me. The pulse of wanting is proof that you haven't gone numb yet, that even in a world of emotional drought, some part of you still thirsts for connection. But there's a hidden truth beneath that pulse. The deeper the deprivation, the more powerful the fantasy. Because the mind doesn't just long for the object, it longs for relief. And if real love has always felt unpredictable, the fantasy becomes the safest place to feel alive. It's predictable, controlled, beautiful in its distance. People often think lust is about attraction, but it's more often about hope. Hope that this person will finally unlock a version of you that feels desired. Hope that their attention will validate the parts of you you've been taught to hide. Hope that, through them, you'll finally touch the feeling of being enough. But hope tied to fantasy is a fragile kind of fire. It burns hot, but leaves you emptier each time. Because no one can embody what your imagination has already perfected. And yet you'll keep reaching again and again, not because you're foolish, but because you're human. We were raised in a world that taught us to equate difficulty with value. That if love doesn't hurt, it isn't real. That if it comes easily, it must not be worth much. So we learned to romanticize the ache, to call it chemistry, to confuse anxiety with attraction. But chemistry that's born of fear is just familiarity in disguise. It's your nervous system saying, this feels like home, even when home was where you learned to ache. Notice how desire always spikes when uncertainty grows. When you don't know if they want you, every glance feels charged. When they pull away, your body interprets it as scarcity. And scarcity always intensifies craving. That's not lust, that's survival. Your system still believes love is something you have to chase to deserve. Every unreciprocated crush, every forbidden connection, every near miss you can't stop thinking about, they're all teachers. They show you what kind of love your body still thinks it has to earn. They reveal where desire is tangled with pain. And when you see that clearly, the ache becomes less of a punishment and more of a message. It's your history speaking through your heartbeat. The people we can't have are often stand-ins for what our soul still seeks permission to feel. That's why it's so consuming. Because it's not about them. It's about the part of you that still aches to be chosen without having to perform. Every no from them replays an older no you never got closure from, and every maybe keeps that old wound alive. We rarely notice how our fantasies keep us safe. When you stay obsessed with the one you can't have, you never have to face the ones you could. You never have to risk being known for real. You can stay in control of the narrative, perfectly tragic, perfectly unfulfilled, perfectly untouchable. And in that safe distance, you mistake loneliness for passion. But something shifts when you finally realize that longing is not love. Longing is a language of survival. It's how the heart says, I'm still waiting for the safety I never got. And the moment you can see that, lust becomes less of a mystery and more of a mirror. Because the very person you can't have has already given you what you needed. Clarity. Clarity that your hunger isn't proof of love. It's proof of absence. Clarity that intensity doesn't equal intimacy. Clarity that the one who can make your heart race might also keep it restless. And that's not a flaw in you. It's a pattern waiting to be understood. Desire without fulfillment forces you to confront your own thresholds. It shows you how much emptiness you can sit with before calling it love. It teaches you where your boundaries blur under the weight of imagination. And maybe that's what makes lust such a powerful teacher. It reveals your unfinished emotional work. If you can trace your strongest attractions, you'll often find they point to your oldest wounds. The unavailable person echoes the parent who was too distracted. The inconsistent one mirrors the love that came and went without warning. The forbidden one recreates the thrill of danger you once mistook for attention. And your body remembers. It keeps chasing what feels like home, even when home was chaos. But awareness doesn't kill desire. It transforms it. When you recognize what you're really yearning for, the spell begins to fade. Not with shame, but with tenderness. You start to see the fantasy as a message, not a mistake. You learn to thank the ache for showing you where you still need to heal. And in that gratitude, something unexpected appears. Softness. The kind of softness that doesn't need to chase or conquer. The kind that can hold desire without needing it to complete you. The kind that finally understands that wanting is not weakness. It's memory asking to be met. But even then, the pull doesn't disappear overnight. It lingers like a phantom limb, not because you still need them, but because you're still adjusting to the space they once filled. You'll still dream of them sometimes, still feel the pulse when their name crosses your mind. That's okay. Healing doesn't erase patterns. It just gives you new choices inside them. And maybe the next time you feel that rush, that dizzy, electric want, you'll pause long enough to ask, what does this remind me of? Because the answer to that question is where your freedom lives. Freedom not from desire, but from the illusion that desire must end in possession. Freedom to let beauty stay beautiful without owning it. Freedom to feel deeply without losing yourself in the feeling. And that's the hardest kind of freedom, the kind that asks you to stay awake inside your own wanting, to hold the ache without numbing it, without naming it love, without demanding it become something else, to realize that maybe the point was never to have them at all, but to finally meet the parts of yourself that came alive when you thought you might. Some loves are meant to be touched. Others are meant to awaken. The ones you can't have are often the ones that hold the deepest mirrors, because they show you your own capacity to feel, to imagine, to ache, to hope. They remind you that you are still capable of being moved. And maybe that's the quiet secret beneath every unfulfilled desire. It's not punishment. It's presence. It's life saying, you are still open. You are still capable of wonder, even when it hurts. You are still someone who reaches for more, even when more never arrives. What if that's the real gift of wanting what you can't have? The rediscovery of how alive you still are in the wanting? Because the truth is, most of us don't fear rejection. We fear the silence that follows when the fantasy ends. We fear the space it leaves behind. We fear meeting ourselves there, without distraction. But that space is where the real intimacy begins. When you stop chasing the unreachable, you start hearing your own heartbeat again, steady, unperformed, unprovoked. You start noticing that love was never outside of you. It was always in the way you felt things deeply, in the way you imagined, hoped, and held possibility. Maybe lust hits hardest when you can't have them, because it's the only time you let yourself feel fully. When there's no real risk, you allow the full flood of emotion. And in that safe impossibility, you touch your own depth without fear of loss. So the ache isn't a curse. It's a compass. It points you back to the places in you that still long to be met. It reminds you that intensity isn't love. It's the signal of an unhealed hunger. And when you learn to listen instead of chase, that hunger softens into wisdom. There will always be people who awaken this feeling in you. They'll appear like mirrors, stirring what's half asleep inside. But now you'll know. What's pulling you toward them isn't their absence. It's your own readiness to meet yourself at a deeper level. So maybe the question isn't, why can't I have them? Maybe it's, what part of me is still trying to find home through someone else? And as that question lingers, softly, honestly, you might realize that the ache was never about them. It was the sound of your own soul asking to be touched, not by another, but by you.